Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Graham. How's it going, Graham?
Happy to be here.
Amazing. This is going to be so much fun. I'm really excited. We've been a little ways off for doing this one. We missed a couple of weeks, but we're here, and it's going to be great. Um, the last episode we did, we talked about Heliogabalus by Artaud, which was an amazing magical text, right? And Heliogabalus was sort of this Roman emperor who tried to create sort of this unifying mother goddess religion and embody that within himself, right? And really bring everything together to save the empire in this sort of time of crisis by embodying it in the self, at least through Artaud's eyes. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, that's a good summation.
And I really wanted to talk about Julian because I feel like Julian is a very similar character to Heliogabalus. He is also an emperor of Rome. And he is interesting in the sense that in his time, he was born a Christian, but he apostatized and became a pagan, a Hellenistic pagan, specifically a worshiper of the divine sun, Helios. And he kept that private for most of his life until he became emperor himself. And then he went on a quest to restore Hellenism, paganism to its rightful place at the center of Rome. And he tried to prevent the rise of Christianity, and he tried to stop Christianity from taking over everything. And just a really, really interesting character. But story would be told he only wound up reigning for 20 months before he died fighting the Persians. So he never got to become the revitalizer of paganism. Instead, he became a boogeyman to the Christians, who vilified him and made him out to be far worse than he ever was, you know. And also claimed he got killed by a Christian, which never happened. He died against the Persians. So, but similar ideas in the sense that, you know, what Julian is trying to do is reform his pagan beliefs and fight against the loss of tradition. And he's trying to contend with monotheism and also incorporate monotheism. He's trying to contend with Mithraism and incorporate Mithraism and all these other different religions and ideas. And he's really about trying to embody this idea of unifying the emperor and unifying faith and going back to tradition within the self. And we see that Heliogabalus was doing sort of the same thing in essence, right?
Definitely. And they both come from, initiated backgrounds, and they're well versed in the mysteries. They were living the mysteries, and they wanted to bring this into everyone's everyday life.
Right. Where Heliogabalus was of Syrian origin, right? And he came from that mother goddess cult, was born and raised into it. Emperor Julian goes to Pergamum, right? One of the seats of the mother goddess cult, and is initiated, right? And he is trained in philosophy. So there's all this incredible stuff with him. And he also, we'll get into it in the book, but he describes he's always had this connection to the sun, that's driven him. And we had already talked about earlier one of his other works, the Hymn to the Mother of Gods. Do you remember anything about that work, Graham?
It was a lot. But, the focus was the Divine Mother and the Muses, and, the recognition that, it's about worshiping all of the gods and goddesses.
That was a big thing for sure. The thing with the Mother of Gods was he was talking about the cycles, and he was talking about the installation of the mother cult in Rome coming from Syria. And he talked about, why the ancient Greek Athenian state fell, because they persecuted the worshippers of the Great Mother. specifically the women. And then he was saying that the Christians were doing the same thing, and this was going to bring about the fall in the same way, right? And
Exactly.
it was an interesting text because he is in that text really elevating the mother goddess to this central position as the creatress, as like that divine being that must be imitated, right? He tells the story of Attis, who is driven into the mud and castrates himself to escape. But what's interesting is in his version of this Attis story is that he has that beast, Helios, Apollo, his center deity that we're going to see, who comes in as this theriac drug to cause the madness in Attis that caused him to castrate himself and to come out of the waters and to strive back after the mother and to, no longer wish to be driven into creation, right? So really interesting kind of story there. And you see this Helios character playing a central role, even though throughout that text he's celebrating the mother, right? But you're right, you bring up this really important part before we really get heavily into the Julian text, is that Julian is really practicing sort of like henotheism, or like a sort of form of polytheistic polycentrism, where it's this idea that you can elevate a god to that supreme position, or to that central, in his word, central position would be more important. The fifth material substance, as we'll see. And he does this with Apollo Helios, but it's like he doesn't ever stop worshiping all of the gods, right? This is very clear and important to him. And it's kind of like this duality. You have almost this monotheism, but you also have this polytheism. And we have to wonder how much of this is his actual belief, or is this his way of trying to contend against the rise of monotheism and incorporate monotheistic tendencies? It's hard to say, because this is very much, it wasn't even 100% accepted by the pagans of his day. Some did, some didn't, right? We saw that the hymn to the Mother of Gods, right, was written because of the cynic Heraclius, right? Heraclius, sorry, who offended him so much that he had to write that all out to prove that the mysteries were valid, And so, like, even within the pagans, right, there's deep resentment and different factions. And Julian, as much as he's just, on one hand saying that he's this reviver of an ancient tradition, he's also a reformer of that ancient tradition, So it's interesting. And we remember too with Julian that he's really taking from that Pergamum school, right? He's really invested in Iamblichus, and specifically Iamblichus's translation and commentary on the Chaldean oracles. This is kind of where a lot of his thinking is coming from. And then we'll get into it a bit more here, but what do you think so far? Do you have anything to add or comments, Graham?
Let's keep trucking.
I'm just ranting at you. You don't mind?
No, I love it. I love it. Expand my brain.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to include this awesome painting. This is Emperor Julian at a Bacchan revelry, right? There's a bunch of satyrs around. They got a statue to the Great Mother. Just awesome.
Beautiful.
And here we have the divine Helios, in bas relief. This is a really interesting text. So this is talking about a character, Salutis, who was a philosopher and a personal friend of Emperor Julian. And Julian actually dedicates the hymn to King Helios to Salutis. And it's sort of written in a way to help Salutius. So Salutius is also a philosopher and in someone who comes out of the Pergamum school. And he's famous for writing a small catechism on refined paganism called Concerning the Gods and the Universe. And we know that him and Julian were super, super close, because in 363, Julian honors him. and he stays with him and even accompanies him right up until his death in Persia, you know. And so this is in many ways the hymn to King Helios is he's a part of a school, he's a part of a train of thought, and he's empowering this movement, right? He's not solo in this quest to refine paganism, and we also have to remember that. As much as I said some people were resisting him, other people were clearly supporting him, you know. And he's coming at this from like you said, an initiated perspective with other initiated mystery writers who are trying to fight against this pagan rise, or sorry, this Christian rise. And they're doing it through this philosophical reformation, you know, trying to really incorporate sort of this Stoic approach, right? They're trying to be very Platonic. They want the priests to really focus on reading like not the muse poetry, what I love, but like the specific hymn poetry and the philosophers. And you know, Julian was very much one of these more pious than thou art type people, you know. So I just want to include this in this beautiful painting of Apollo. We'll see that, you know, Julian also conflates a lot of these energies and these deities together as we go throughout the hymn here. So we're just going to read the whole hymn and have some fun with this, okay? So I hope you like my voice. And Graham, feel free to jump in if you ever have any comments or just have any questions or anything, okay?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So here we have the hymn to King Helios by Emperor Julian. What am I now about to say I consider to be of the greatest importance for all things that breathe and move upon the earth and have a share in existence and a reasoning soul and intelligence. But above all others, it is of importance to myself, for I am a follower of King Helios, and of this fact I possess within me, known to myself alone, proofs more certain than I can give. But this at least I am permitted to say without sacrilege, that from my childhood an extraordinary longing for the rays of the god penetrated deep in my soul. And from my earliest years my mind was so completely swayed by the light that illumes the heavens, that not only did I desire to gaze intently at the sun, but whenever I walked abroad in the night season, when the firmament was clear and cloudless, I abandoned all else without exception, and gave myself up to the beauties of the heavens. Nor did I understand what anyone might say to me, nor heed what I was doing myself. I was considered to be over curious about these matters, and to pay too much attention to them, and people went so far as to regard me as an astrologer, when my beard had only just begun to grow. And yet I call heaven to witness, never had a book on this subject come into my hands, nor did I as yet even know what that science was. But why do I mention this, when I have more important things to tell, if I should relate how in those days I thought about the gods? So a lot of wildness right in the beginning paragraph here. So he identifies himself, number one, as a follower of King Helios, and that he's going to reveal to us in his mind the most important knowledge for any intelligent life, right? Anything with the soul, you know? And he also tells us that he's going to say what he's permitted to say without sacrilege. So he basically admits in an underhanded way that he has been initiated without claiming so. And what he tells us is kind of magical, that from his youth he had this connection to the sun and the lights and the stars and trying to strive after those divine rays, right? This connects us to that Phoenician tradition, you know? And a lot of scholars have identified this particular line because in the Greek, it really references specifically the rays of the sun and the Phoenician tradition itself. And they call it the solar periscope as this kind of one of several connections to the Phoenician tradition. And we know the Phoenicians are the purple people, right? This is deep drug mystery, ancient Eastern rites, you know, absolute wildness. And, you know, it's just also cool that he had this deep kind of almost muse-like connection where people recognize him from a young age as being mystical, and having gained kind of mystical knowledge without ever having read about anything, just from this connection, this spiritual depth that he possessed.
It's eerily similar to our toe.
Love it.
In the text I was reading earlier today, he says that the Tarahumara say that the peyote plant comes to those who are destined to experience it. Similarly, it could be said that maybe Julian was destined to have this connection to the sun.
Beautiful. I do. Yeah, he would definitely think so. It's magical. All right, let's continue here. However, let that darkness be buried in oblivion, but let what I have said bear witness to this fact, that the heavenly light shone all about me, and that it roused and urged me on to its contemplation, so that even then I recognized of myself that the movement of the moon was in the opposite direction to the universe, though as yet I had met no one of those who are wise in these matters. Right? This is deep mystery. The moon moves in opposition to the universe. Okay? That absolute virgin, the moon, resists generation and fights against it and turns in opposition. Right? This is some Orphic kind of stuff going on. All right. So where was I here? Now for my part, I envy the good fortune of any man to whom the God has granted to inherit a body built of the seed of holy and inspired ancestors, so that he can unlock the treasures of wisdom. Nor do I despise that lot with which I was myself endowed by the god Helios, that I should be born of a house that rules and governs the world in my time. But further, I regard this God, if we may believe the wise, as the common father of all mankind. This is really important. The common father of all mankind would be known by anyone initiated or in Hellenism. That's Prometheus. Prometheus is the common father. He created humanity and gave us the power of foresight and the light, right? Through his sacrifice. Okay. And it's amazing too. He's talking about the cycles and of generation and connecting to the ancestors, right? For it is said with truth that man and the sun together beget man, and that the God sows this earth with the souls which proceed not from himself alone, but from the other gods also. Polytheistic polycentrism, right? And for what purpose the souls reveal but the kind of lives that they select. Now far the best thing is when anyone has the fortune to have inherited the service of the God, even before the third generation, from a long unbroken line of ancestors. Yet it is not a thing to be disparaged when anyone, recognizing that he is by nature intended to be the servant of Helios, either alone of all men or in the company with but a few, devotes himself to the service of his master.
Wow.
Right? And again, it's this magical calling to serve the sun. And it can be just that calling and recognized through the sun itself, or to be initiated into the mysteries, right? And he recognizes different levels and different responsibilities, that his house was chosen and all this stuff, right? It really reminds me of a lot of stuff we see in Hindu literature with Dharma. So, interesting. Come then, let me celebrate as best I may his festival, which the imperial city adorns with annual sacrifices. Now it is hard, as I well know, merely to comprehend how great is the invisible, if one judge by his visible self, and to tell it is perhaps impossible, even though one should consent to fall short for what is his due. So what he's talking about, okay, the invisible sun is Apollo, the light, right? Almost that Holy Spirit in a Christian sense. The visible self is the Titan Helios, that star, the sun that sits in the center of our universe, right? At least for metaphysical, not literal sense of center, right? Okay. For well I know that no one in the world could attain to a description that would be worthy of him, and not to fail of a certain measure of success in his praises is the greatest height to which human beings can attain in the power of utterance. But as for me, may Hermes, the god of eloquence, stand by my side to aid me, and the muses also, and Apollo, the leader of the muses, since he too has oratory for his province, and may they grant that I utter only what the gods approve, that men should say and believe about them what then shall be the manner of my praise. Or is it not evident that if I describe his substance and his origin, and his powers and energies both visible and invisible, and the gift of blessings which he bestows throughout the worlds, I shall compose an encomium, and not wholly displeasing to the god? With these then let me begin. So it's also important he's identifying this solar hierarchy and in this power unfolding from that titanic Helios, right, to that eloquence, right, that divine reason, Hermes, right, to the muses and Apollo, who is the leader of the muses, right, and that oratory, right, and he's calling them specifically to inspire him and his words. Just beautiful, right?
I'm loving it.
Okay. Sorry, where was I? Did I go too far? I think I did. Where is this? Let me begin. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Right. This divine and wholly beautiful universe, from the highest vault of heaven to the lowest limit of the earth, is held together by the continuous providence of the God, has existed from eternity ungenerated, is imperishable for all time to come, and is guarded immediately by nothing else than the fifth substance, whose culmination is the beams of the sun. So that fifth substance is the light, the energy, right? That Apollo. And in the second and higher, it's also that Eros, right? This is very Orphic in its kind of character. And in the second and higher degree, so to speak, by the intelligible world. But in a still loftier sense, it is guarded by the king of the whole universe, who is the center of all things that exist. He, therefore, whether it is right to call him the supra intelligible or the idea of being, and by being I mean the whole intelligible region, or the one, since the one seems somehow to be prior to all the rest, or to use Plato's name for him, the good. At any rate, this uncompounded cause of the whole reveals to all existence beauty and perfection and oneness and irresistible power. And in virtue of the primal creative substance that abides in it, produced as middle among the middle and intellectual creative causes, Helios, the most mighty god, proceeding from itself and in all things unto itself. Even so the divine Plato believed when he writes, "Therefore said I, when I spoke of this, understand that I meant the offspring of the good, which the good begat in his own likeness, and that what the good is in relation to pure reason and its object in the intelligible world, such as the sun in the visible world in relation to the sight and its objects." So identifying here the sun with the good, and with the sight and with the light, right? And the intelligible world with the objects that we can perceive. And the good is also that reason. Such an incredible stuff. And then he's talking about this oneness, right? This is where we get into some of the accusations he gets, where he gets called a monotheistic person, right? Turning Helios into that absolute one, or more accurately, a Platonic monist, you know? But I want to say I rather see him as a henotheist, right? Someone who puts, because when you compare this to the mother of gods, right? The mother becomes that center. You know, so he chooses who the center is. And he says earlier that any of the gods can be the center, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for him, he's a follower of Helios. You see the similar stuff in a lot of the Hindu literature, you know, this kind of henotheosis or panentheism.
Reminds me a lot of Heliogabalus too, where it's the polytheism of the male and the female, but also the monotheism of them as one hermaphroditic being at the same time. It's like a duality.
Right? Or like the qualified monism we see in Kashmiri Shaivism of like Abhinavagupta, right? Where it's the one and the many, you know?
Exactly.
Right. Beautiful. Okay. So let's continue. Accordingly, his light has the same relation to the visible world as truth has to the intelligible world. And he himself, as a whole, since he is the son of what is first and greatest, namely the idea of the good, and subsists from eternity in the region of its abiding substance, has received also the dominion among the intellectual gods, and himself dispenses to the intellectual gods those things of which the good is the cause for the intelligible gods. Now, the good is, I suppose, the cause for the intelligible gods of beauty, existence, perfection, and oneness, connecting these and illuminating them with a power that works for good. These, accordingly, Helios bestows on the intellectual gods also, since he has been appointed by the good to rule and govern them, even though they came forth and came into being together with him. That's an important line. So he is still, right? He loves Helios, and Helios is still the number one, even though they all come out at the same time and they have this kind of hierarchical framework, right? It's kind of like you said, it's both a hierarchy and not. It's wild. And this was, I suppose, in order that the cause which resembles the good may guide the intellectual gods to blessing them for all, and may regulate all things according to pure reason, which is just awesome.
Mm.
It's very idealistic, Julian, very, very much Neoplatonic. All right. But this visible disk, also third in rank, is clearly for the objects of sense perception the cause of preservation. And this visible Helios is the cause for the visible gods. Of just as many blessings as we said, mighty Helios bestows on the intellectual gods. And of this, there are clear proofs for one who studies the unseen world in the light of things seen. Right. So he's trying to justify Helios's place in this hierarchy, right? Because Helios is the Titanic sun, and he's not this ideal, right? If you go to the absolute extreme, the idea would be that mother, right? She is chaos, the womb, the absolute creatrix, or you could say that Zeus is the demiurge, right? A lot of other pagans would argue that Zeus is the primordial force, the creator, the one who controls everything. And what he's saying is that even though Helios is less in the order than either the mother or Zeus, being in the third, he's central, right? He's in the middle path.
In Heliogabalus, they say that they never created a statue to the sun or the moon because you can see them in the sky.
Right?
It's one of the deities that you can see just in your everyday life.
Exactly. Wow. For in the first place, is not light itself a sort of incorporeal and divine form of the transparent in the state of activity? Wow. And as for the transparent itself, whatever it is the underlying basis, so to speak, of all the elements, and is a form peculiarly belonging to them. It is not like the corporeal or compounded, nor does it emit qualities peculiar to corporeal substance. You will not therefore say that heat is property of the transparent, or its opposite cold, nor will you assign it to its hardness or softness, or any other of the various attributes connected with touch, taste, or smell. But a nature of this sort is obvious to sight alone, since it is brought into activity by light. And light is a form of this substance, so to speak, which is the substratum of and coextensive with the heavenly bodies. He recognizes that light comes from the heavenly bodies, which is beautiful. And of light itself, incorporeal, the culmination and flower, so to speak, is the sun's rays. Now, the doctrine of the Phoenicians, right? We're talking about the solar periscope, who were wise and learned in sacred lore, declared that the rays of light were everywhere diffused and the undefiled incarnation of pure mind. Again, pure
Ah,
mind, pure reason. Prometheus, right? Prometheus is that forethought, that pure mind.
with something interesting about the human eye is that it's passive, and you can only see things when light is applied. So Prometheus illuminating the
Right?
darkness is like it's a very literal thing.
He shines a light into your abyss, right?
Yeah, it activates those rods and cones.
It's freaking wild, you know? And again, we have the purple people showing up, and it's important that he's making this connection because he's basically telling us that the Phoenicians have the mystery and that his mystery is Phoenician, right? They're similar.
Mhm.
They're different, but they're of the same, right? A lot this is you'll see this with a lot of pagan stuff, right? Where they go, oh, Aphrodite is Isis. You know, they're different but the same, you know? And what they're doing is legitimate. So what he's saying is, you see us and the Phoenicians, right? And you know why I'm right? Because the Phoenicians are right. And you see, I'm doing what the Phoenicians are doing, and we both see the same thing, right? You know?
I love it.
All right. And in harmony with this is our theory, seeing that light itself is incorporeal. If one should regard its fountainhead not as corporeal, but as the undefiled activity of mind, pouring light into its own abode. And this is assigned to the middle of the whole firmament, whence it sheds its rays and fills the heavenly spheres with vigor of every kind, and illumes all things with light divine and undefiled. Now the activities proceeding from it and exercised among the gods have been, in some measure at least, described by me a little earlier, and will shortly be further spoken of. But all that we see merely with the sight at first is a name only, is a perception, right?
Mm.
What is the name but to see? Wow. Deprived of activity unless we add thereto it the guidance and aid of light. For what speaking generally could be seen, were it not first brought into touch with light in order that, I suppose, it may receive a form, as matter is brought under the hand of a craftsman, right? The very act of perception is a violent act that transforms what is perceived, right? You are crafting it. And what's wild is this craftsman, this is not just craftsman, this is Hephaestus. Okay. And indeed, molten gold into the rough is simply gold, and yet a statue or an image, until the craftsman give it the proper shape. What does Helios do but adds the fire to gold, right? So
Mhm.
to all the objects of sight, unless they are brought under the eyes of the beholder together with light, are altogether deprived of visibility. Accordingly, by giving the power of sight to those who see, and the power of being seen to the objects of sight, it brings to perfection. The very act of perceiving is to invoke beauty and to create, right? And it's like this coming together of form in it's just wild. And in forms and substance are exposed to its perfecting powers. To be
Like
in
I
the
was
light,
saying, the eye needs the light to be able to see and to create that perception and bring that beauty into
right?
form.
But it's important we also understand that the light is this transforming force that causes action and causes us to enter into this state of striving after perfection, right? And you see like this as this force of evolution, right? As that cosmogonic eros that forces the unfolding of creation and that ever refining, ever regenerating, you know? And even when we rise and collapse, we refine and learn and evolve and readapt and try again, ever refining, ever striving because of that light, right?
Exactly.
It's that power
The,
of that sun, that Apollo.
this line
Oh,
about
sorry.
the crack. No, that's okay. We were just talking about it. The matter is brought under the hand of a. It may. Where are we? Until the craftsman gives it its proper shape. that reminds me of a quote that I heard once that was every statue already lives within the rock, and you just have to expose it.
Oh
It just
wow, yeah.
reminded me of that, and I just thought it was beautiful. Sorry, I don't mean to digress.
No. That's amazing that you bring that up because it's also very true, right? And I know I interviewed this incredible artist, Mariah, who did sculpture, and she said the same thing. You know, the you have to see the image inherent in the form first, right? Like you can't force the rock to become something that's not there. You know, in the heart of the rock is an image. You know, it wants to come forth. It wants to be refined and created into something beautiful. You
Just
know, and this
yearning for the
is what,
touch of the muse.
right? This is what that Apollo, that Hephaestus power does. It's all about this refining through force, right? And through transformation, through that, you know, striving and going through the cycles, right? And trying and perfecting. You're ever forming, ever creating, you know, under that good, under that reason. Beautiful. Okay, let's continue. However, this is perhaps somewhat subtle. But as for that guide whom we all follow, ignorant and unlearned philosophers and rhetoricians, what power in the universe has this God when he rises and sets? Night and day he creates, and before our eyes changes and sways the universe. Right? But to which
Um,
of the other heavenly bodies does this power belong? How then can we now fail to believe in view of this and respect also to things more divine than that invisible and divine tribes of intellectual gods above the heavens are filled with power that works for good by him, even by him to whom the whole band of the heavenly bodies yields place, and whom all generated things follow, piloted by his providence, right? They recognize that all life is coming from light, right? And the sun is the central light in our universe. For that the planets dance around him as their king in certain intervals fixed in relation to him and revolve in a circle with a perfect accord, making certain halts and pursuing to and fro their orbit, as those who are learned in the study of spheres call their visible motions, and that the light of the moon waxes and wanes, varying in proportion to its distance from the sun, is, I think, clear to all. They even recognize that the moon is a mirror, right? Then is not natural that we should suppose that the more venerable ordering of bodies among the intellectual gods corresponds to this arrangement. So he's trying to say that that which we can't perceive, the ideas, is idealistic, and that in our universe, the most powerful thing, the thing that commands everything, is the sun, right? And it is clear to all who see,
it really is. It
right?
reminds me of bit of a non sequitur, but there's this band called The Ocean, and they have a line. There's no ambiguity. If Venus shows all phases of the moon, uh, shit, I lost it. Sorry, but it's beautiful.
If it comes back to you, remind us, because I do
Yeah,
like.
I'll come back to it.
All right, let's continue. Let us therefore comprehend out of all his functions, first his power to perfect, from the fact that he makes visible the objects of sight in the universe, for through his light he perfects them. Secondly, his creative and generative power, from the changes wrought by him in the universe. Thirdly, his power to link together all things into one whole, from the harmony of his motions towards one and the same goal. Fourthly, his middle station we can comprehend from himself, who is midmost. And fifthly, the fact that he is established as king among the intellectual gods from his middle station among the planets. Now, if we see that these powers or powers of similar importance belong to any one of the other visible deities, let us not assign to Helios leadership among the gods. But if he has nothing in common with those other gods except his beneficent energy, and of this too he gives them all a share, then let us call to witness the priests of Cyprus or Aphrodite, who set up common altars to Helios and Zeus. But even before them, let us summon as witness Apollo, who sits in council with our God, right? Because Apollo and Helios are, one is the sun and one is the light, right? For this God declares Zeus, Hades, Helios, Serapis, three gods in one Godhead. Doesn't this remind you of the Trinity?
I was about to say, nice to see a little Holy Trinity there.
Right? All of a sudden, you have Zeus as the father, you have Hades as that feminine other, and then you have Helios Serapis to represent the Holy Ghost, right? That beast. Well, Hades is all supposed to be the feminine. She should be saying Persephone, in this.
Right.
But he's keeping it masculine for some reason. I guess to make it that Godhead, right? But really, by invoking Hades, he's invoking Persephone here. So it should be Zeus, Persephone, Helios, Serapis. And it's important that we recognize Serapis because Serapis is another cult that's very Dionysian. It's similar to Mithraism that's around that Emperor Julian is trying to incorporate. He's saying all you cults that are kind of similar but are being persecuted by the Christians, let's all hook up and reform paganism. I'll incorporate you. You can be part of it, But it didn't work. All right, let's continue. Let us then assume that among the intellectual gods, Helios and Zeus have a joint, rather a single sovereignty. Hence, I think that with reason, Plato called Hades a wise god. And we call the same god Hades Serapis, also namely the unseen and intellectual, to whom Plato says, the souls of those who have lived most righteously and justly mount upwards. For let no one conceive of him as the god whom the legends teach us to shudder at, but as the mild and placable, since he completely frees our souls from generation. And the souls that he has thus freed he does not nail to other bodies, punishing them in exalting penalties, but he carries aloft and uplifts our souls to the intelligible world. And that this doctrine is not wholly new, but that Homer and Hesiod, the most venerable of poets, held it before us, whether this was their own view or like seers they were divinely inspired with a sacred frenzy for the truth, is evident from the following. Hesiod, in tracing his genealogy, said that Helios is the son of Hyperion and Theia, right? Hyperion and Theia, these are like two important titans. Hyperion, right, is like he who watches from above, is the titan of like heavenly light, okay, and is one of the sons of Uranus, heaven, and Gaia, earth, and is the father of the lights of heaven. So like Eos, the dawn, and Helios and Selene, the moon, and is married to Theia, who he mentioned, which is sight, right? The shining ether, prophecy, the blue sky, right? She was also the goddess who endowed gold and silver, their brilliance, and she brings the divine prophecy, Theia, right? Okay, so just so you know who we're talking about. Where was that? Sorry. For who else could Hyperion be? And is not Theia herself in another fashion said to be the most divine of beings? But as for a union or marriage, let us not conceive of such a thing, since that is incredible and paradoxical trifling of the poetic muse. Here I get, I take some exception with Julian a few times. This is one of them, because like, come on, right? The lovemaking is not paradoxical. This is the poetic muse. And he imagines them as these idyllic platonic forms, right? Whatever. But let us believe that his father and sire was the most divine and supreme being. And who else could have this nature save him who transcends all things, the center point and goal of all things that exists. And Homer calls him Hyperion after his father, and shows his unconditioned nature superior to all constraint. For Zeus, as Homer says, since is lord of all constraints, the other gods, and when in the course of the myth Helios says that on account of the impiety of the comrades of Odysseus, he will forsake Olympus, Zeus no longer says then, with every earth would I draw you up, and the sea withal, nor does he threaten him with fetters or violence, but he says that he will inflict punishment on the guilty and bids Helios go on shining among the gods. So, okay, part of this is what they're talking about is, Zeus protected Odysseus after Odysseus stole Helios's cows, and ate them. And Helios was super mad about this, and so he left Olympus. There's a few titans whose power didn't get usurped, and Helios was one of them. He maintained his magic. The Hecate is another. She also never had her power taken, But it's interesting. So he's again trying to justify Helios's power, even though he's not the demiurge, the constrictor Zeus, but he forsake Olympus and he's in his own center power, and he does his own thing, and that's why he's greater than everyone, And it's this again. We have to remember that this is this magic of reading into the myths and drawing forth the images that you want, and this power of myth, and also he's recreating the myth in his own image, and he's engaged in this process. It's so funny. Even as he condemns the poetic muse, he's invoking the poetic muse to create his own mythology.
I was just thinking that.
Gotta love it. So does he not thereby declare that besides being unconditioned, Helios has also the power to perfect? For why do the gods need him unless by sending his light, himself invisible on their substance and existence? He fulfills for them the blessings of which I spoke. For when Homer says that ox-eyed Hera the queen sent unwearied Helios to go all unwilling to the streams of Oceanus, Oceanus is the divine river that goes around the world, another titan. He means that by reason of heaven mist, it was thought to be night before the proper time. And this mist is surely the goddess herself. And in another place, also in the poem, he says, Hera spread before them a thick mist. But let us leave the stories of the poets alone, for along with what is inspired, they contain much also that is merely human. Right? He doesn't like the fact that Hera can obscure Helios with her mist. And he's like, we'll just ignore that part.
We're all a bit selective in what we love, right?
Right. And let me now, and he says, the poets are human after all. Even they can conflate too much power with other people like Hera. It's like, give me
when he himself could be accused of doing the same thing, which is pretty funny.
He's actively doing it here, right? Rewriting history. And let me now relate what the god himself seems to teach us, both about himself and the other gods. The region of the earth contains being in a state of becoming. Then who endows it with imperishability? Is it not he who keeps all together by means of definite limits? For what the nature of being should be unlimited was not possible, since it is neither uncreated nor self-subsistent. That's kind of cool. Life isn't created and it can't subside on itself. It must consume others, right? It must grow and generate. And if from being something were generated absolutely without ceasing and nothing were resolved back into it, the substance of things generated would fail, right? You need that constriction. Accordingly, this God, moving in due measure, rises up and stimulates this substance when he approaches it. And when he departs to a distance, he diminishes and destroys it. This really reminds me of Shiva Nataraj, the dancer, who moves in that infinity of destruction and creation, right? And his departure and turning her direction is the cause of decay for things that perish. Ever does his gift of blessing descend evenly upon the earth. For now one country, now another receives them, to the end that becoming may not cease, nor the god ever benefit less or more than is his custom, this changeful world. For sameness as of being, so also of activity exists among the gods, and above all the others, in the case of the king of the all, Helios. And he also makes the simplest movement of all the heavenly bodies, that travel in a direction opposite to the whole. So he controls everything, and he is the absolute center, and everything is same and one with him. You know. In fact, this is a very thing that celebrated Aristotle makes a proof of his superiority compared with the others. Nevertheless, from the other intellectual gods also forces clearly discernible descend to this world. And now, what does this mean? Are we not excluding the others when we assert that the leadership has been assigned to Helios? Nay, far rather do I think it's right, the visible to have faith about the invisible. For even as this God is seen to complete and to adapt to himself and to the universe the powers that are bestowed on the earth from the other gods for all things, after the same fashion we must believe that among the invisible gods also there is intercourse with one another. Wasn't he even just saying before that they weren't engaging in intercourse? Funny. His mode of intercourse being that of a leader, while the modes of intercourse of others are at the same time in harmony with his. For since we said that the god is established midmost among the midmost intellectual gods, may King Helios himself grant to us to tell what is the nature of that middleness, among things of which we must regard him as the middle. Right? This also makes me think of Ovid, because Ovid talks about Lucifer and how Lucifer shows us the middle path and can help us navigate between the pillars and the poles and not get burned or get consumed by the dragon and all this stuff, you know?
Right.
Now, middleness, we define not as that mean which is opposite, is seen to be equally remote from the extremes, as for instance in colors, tawny or dusky, and warm in the case of hot and cold and the like, but that which unifies and links together what is separate. For instance, the sort of thing that Empedocles means by harmony. So Empedocles, he's that guy who came up with this idea of love and strife as like the defining features of the universe. And when he's talking about harmony, he's talking about that which like brings everything together in this constant pull, this fight between forces, you know? And now, what does Helios link together? And what is he the middle? I assert that he is the midway between the visible, who surround the universe, and the immaterial and intelligible gods who surround the good. For the intelligible and divine substance is, as it were, multiplied without external influence and without addition. For that the intellectual and wholly beautiful substance of King Helios is middle in the sense of being unmixed with extremes, complete in itself, and distinct from the whole number of the gods, visible and invisible, both those perceptible by sense and those which are intelligible only, I have already declared, and also in what sense we must conceive of his middleness. But if I must also describe these things one by one, in order that we may discern with our intelligence how this intermediary nature is in its various forms, is related both to the highest and the lowest, even though it is not easy to recount it all. Yet let me try to say what can be said. So again, he's doing this thing where he's trying to show that Helios is the absolute center and in control of all of these forces. And even though he is that external absolute good, he is still that middle. And he is that without extremes, and he compels everything to move in harmony around him. You know?
The sun is the high and the low. It rises and sets, right?
Exactly. You got it. Holy One is the intelligible world, pre-existent from all time, and it combines all things together in the one. Again, is not our whole world also one complete living organism? Isn't that beautiful?
I love that.
Animism at its finest. Holy throughout the world of its full of soul and intelligence. Perfect with all its parts, perfect. Midway then between this union twofold perfection, I mean that one kind of unity holds together in one all that exists in the intelligible world, while the other kind of unity unites in the visible world all things into one. And the same perfect nature between these, I say, is the uniform perfection of King Helios. Established among the intellectual gods, there is, however, next in order a sort of binding force in the intelligible world of the gods, which orders all things into one. Again, there is not visible in the heavens also traveling in its orbits the nature of the fifth substance, which links and compresses together all the parts, holding together things that by nature are prone to scatter and to fall away from one another. These existences, therefore, which are two causes of connection, one in the intelligible world while the other appears in the world of sense perception, King Helios combines into one, imitating the synthetic power of the former among the intellectual gods, seeing that he proceeds from it, and subsisting prior to the latter which is seen in the visible world. Again, right, he's uniting all of these forces and he's driving all these forces, that absolute middle. Then must not the unconditioned also, which exists primarily in the intelligible world and finally among the visible bodies in the heavens, possess midway between these two unconditioned substance of King Helios? And from that primary creative substance, do not the rays of his light, illumining all things, descend to the visible world? And again, to take another point of view, the creator of the whole is one, but many are the creative gods who evolve in the heavens, right? Those rays, those lights, those stars. Midmost, therefore, of these also we must place the creative activity which descends into the world from Helios. But also the power of generating life is abundant and overflowing in the intelligible world. And our world also appears to be full of generative life. It is therefore evident that the life-generating power of King Helios also is midway between both the worlds. And the phenomenon of our world also bear witness to this. For some forms he perfects, others he makes or adorns or wakes to life. And there is no single thing which apart the creative power derived from Helios can come to light and to birth. And further, besides this, if we should comprehend the pure and undefiled and immaterial substance among the intelligible gods, to which nothing external is added, nor has any alien thing a place therein, but is filled with its own unstained purity, and if we should comprehend also the pure and unmixed nature of unstained and divine substance, whose elements are wholly unmixed, and which in the visible universe surrounds the substance that revolves, here also we should discover the radiant and stainless substance of King Helios, midway between the two, that is to say, midway between the immaterial purity that exists among the intelligible gods and the perfect purity, unstained and free from birth and death that exists in the world which we can perceive. And the greatest proof of this is that not even the light which comes down nearest to the earth from the sun is unmixed with anything, nor does it emit dirt or defilement, but remains wholly pure and without stain and free from external influences among all existing things. You know,
Wow.
again, he's just such beautiful intensity with him, and this idea that everything is coming around the light of the sun, and the light in the sun drives all of everything, and it's that absolute purity, but also that absolute middle. But we must go on to consider the immaterial and intelligible forms, and also those visible forms which are united with matter of the substratum. Here again, the intellectual will be found to be midmost among the forms that surround mighty Helios, by which forms in their turn the material forms are aided, for they never could have existed or been perceived had they not been brought by his aid into connection with being. For consider, is he not the cause of the separation of the forms and of the combination of matter, in that not only permits us to comprehend his very self, but also to behold him with our eyes, for the distribution of his rays over the whole universe and the unifying power of his light prove him to be the master workman who gives an individual existence to everything that is created. He
Wow.
creates all things and allows for all creation. And he allows us to perceive the universe, right? Not just imagine or within the mind, but to actually shine a light and to see. Now, though there are many more blessings connected with the substance of the God and apparent to us, which show that he is midway between the intelligible and the mundane gods, let us proceed to his last visible province. His first province, then, in the last of the worlds, is as though by way of a pattern to give form and personality to the sun's angels. Wow.
Mm.
Sun's angels. These are people like Hermes, right? Next is his province of generating the world of sense perception, of which the more honorable part contains the cause of the heavens and the heavenly bodies, while the inferior part guides this our world of becoming. From eternity contains in itself the uncreated cause of that world. Now, to describe all the properties of the substance of this God, even though the God himself should grant one to comprehend them, is impossible, seeing that even to grasp them all with the mind is, in my opinion, beyond our power. We can't know all of truth. Truth is beyond our mental capacity, right? The universe is absurd. Oop, shoot. Here we go. But since I have already described many of them, I must set a seal, as it were, on this discourse, now that I am about to pass to other subjects that demand no less investigation. What then that seal is, and what is the knowledge of the God substance that embraces all these questions, and as it were sums them up under one head? May he himself suggest to my mind, since I desire to describe in a brief summary both the cause from which he proceeded and his own nature, and those blessings with which he fills the visible world. This then we must declare, that King Helios is one and proceeds from one God, even from the intelligible world which is itself one, and that he is midmost of the intellectual gods, stationed in their midst by every kind of mediateness that is harmonious and friendly, and that joins what is sundered, and that he brings together into one the last and the first, having in his own person the means of completeness of connection, of generative life, and of uniform being. And that for the world which can perceive, he initiates blessings of all sorts, not only by means of the light with which he illumines it, adorning it and giving it its splendor, but also because he calls into existence, along with himself, the substance of the sun's angels, and that finally in himself he comprehends the ungenerated cause of things generated, and further and prior to this, the ageless and abiding cause of life of the imperishable bodies, right? He is responsible for all of creation in all of its myriad of forms. Now, as for what it was right to say about the substance of this God, though the greater part has been omitted, nevertheless, much has been said. But since the multitude of his powers and the beauty of his activities is so great that we shall now exceed the limit of what we observed about his substance. For it is natural that when divine things come forth into the region of the visible, they should be multiplied in virtue of the superabundance of life and life-generating power in them. Consider what I have to do. For now I must strip for a plunge into this fathomless sea, though I have barely and at best I might taken breath. After the first part of this discourse, venture I must, nevertheless, and putting my trust in the God, endeavor to handle the theme. He feels like he cannot explain the beauty and power of life-generating Helios. All right. We must assume that what has just been said about his substance applies equally to his powers. For it cannot be that a God's substance is one thing and his power another, and his activity by Zeus a third thing besides these. For all that he wills, he is and he can do and puts into action. For he does not will what is, nor does he lack power to do what he wills, nor does he desire to put into action what he cannot. In the case of a human being, however, this is otherwise. For he is a twofold contending nature of soul and body compounded into one, the former divine, the latter dark and clouded. Naturally, therefore, there is a battle and feud between them. So we're divided in war as human beings. And Aristotle also says that this is why neither the pleasure nor the pains in us harmonize with one another. For he says that what is pleasant to one of the natures within us is painful to the nature which is its opposite. But among the gods there is nothing of this sort. For from their very nature, what is good belongs to them and perpetually, not intermittently. In the first place, then, all that I said when I tried to show forth his substance, I must be considered to have said about his powers and activities also. And since in such cases the argument is naturally convertible, all that I observe in next in order concerning his powers and activities must be considered to apply not to his activities only, but to his substance also. For verily, there are gods related to Helios and of like substance who summed up the stainless nature of this god, right? He's acknowledging all the various light bringers that make up Helios. And though in this visible world they are plural, in him they are one. And now listen first to what they assert who look at the heavens, not like horses and cattle or some other unreasoning and ignorant animal, but from it draw their conclusions about the unseen world. But even before this, if you please, consider his supramundane powers and activities, and out of a countless number, observe but a few. First, then, of his powers is that through which he reveals the whole intellectual substance throughout as one, since he brings together its extremes, right? In the sun, you have that life-generating force, but also that extreme destruction fire. For even as in the world of sense perception, we can clearly discern air and water set between fire and earth, as a link that binds together the extremes. Would one not reasonably suppose that in the case of the cause which is separate from elements and prior to them, and though it is the principle of generation, is not itself generation? It is so ordered that in the world also the extreme causes, which are wholly separate from elements, are bound together into one, through certain modes of mediation, by King Helios, and are united about him as their center. And the creative power of Zeus also coincides with him, by reason of which in Cyprus, as I said earlier, shrines are founded and assigned to them in common. You know, Zeus and Helios are twins of the same energy, basically. And he says this because the priests of Cyprus, of Aphrodite, worship them together, as we saw earlier. And Apollo himself also we call to witness to our statement, since it is certainly likely that he knows better than we about his own nature. For he too abides with Helios and his colleague by reason of the singleness of his thought and the stability of his substance and the consistency of his activity. Apollo is Helios, right? But Apollo too in no case appears to separate the divining creative function of Dionysus from Helios, right?
Wow.
You can't have Apollo without his twin Dionysus, the sun in the underworld, right?
Waiting for him to pop up.
The dark sun, right? And it's wild that we see this, you know, because so many people fail to recognize the intrinsic connection between Apollo and Dionysus and that they're twins, right? Macrobius says this in the Saturnalia, and now we have Julian affirming this here. And since he always subordinates it to Helios, so indicates that Dionysus is his partner on the throne, right? They're partners, twins. Apollo is the interpreter for us of the fairest purposes that are to be found with our God. Further, Helios, since he comprehends in himself the principle, himself all the principles of the fairest intellectual synthesis, is himself Apollo, the leader of the muses. And since he fills the whole of our life with fair order, he begat Asclepius. Asclepius is the god of medicine, the demigod, right? In the world, though even before the beginning of the world, he had him by his side, because Asclepius is also the divine child to come, right?
Right.
this medicine, this gift, this beauty, right? That serpent staff, that's that child like of the sun. So Harpocrates or Telesphoros. But though one should survey many other powers that belong to this god, never could one investigate them all. It is enough to have observed the following: that there is an equal and identical dominion of one Helios and Zeus over the separate creation which is prior to substances in the region, that is to say, of the absolute causes which, separated from the visible creation, existed prior to it. Secondly, we observe the singleness of his thoughts, which is bound up with the imperishableness and abiding sameness that he shares with Apollo. Thirdly, the dividing part of his creative function, which he shares with Dionysus, who controls divided substance. So Dionysus is the force that divides, divided substance. This also again connects him to who? The dark sun, Saturn. Because what is Saturn but the one who cuts, who divides? Fourthly, we have observed the power of the leader of the muses, revealed in fairest symmetry and blending of the intellectual. Finally, we comprehended that Helios, with Asclepius, fulfills the fair order of the whole life, the promise of the new evolution, the child to come, divine rebirth, and life, godlike, where the divine can ascend to the stars, right? Asclepius promises all of that, and the medicine to save us. You could also say the Soteria, Artemis Soteria promises this, that, or the divine Medea. I don't know why Julian is so masculine bent, but he is. It's fine. He did do the hymn to the Mother of Gods, so we have to give him credit there.
Yeah.
So much then in respect to those powers of his that existed before the beginning of the world, and coordinate with these. These are his works over the whole visible world, and that he fills it with good gifts. For since he is the genuine son of the good, and from it has received his blessed lot in fullness of perfection, he himself distributes that blessedness to the intellectual gods, bestowing on them a benefit and perfect nature. This then is one of his works, and a second work of the god is his most perfect distribution of intelligible beauty among the intellectual and immaterial forms. For when the generative substance which is visible in our world desires to beget in the beautiful and to bring forth offspring, it is further necessary it should be guided by the substance that, in the region of intelligible beauty, does this very thing eternally, and always, not intermediately, now fruitful, now barren. So he's talking about you have to go to that force, that cosmogonic eros, right? He's identifying Helios with that primal force of love and strife, right? Empedocles again. Wow. Where was I?
For all that is beautiful.
For all that is beautiful in our world only at times is beautiful always in the intelligible world. We must therefore assert that the ungenerated offspring and beauty intelligible and eternal guides the generative cause in the visible world, which offspring this god called into existence and keeps at his side. To it he assigns also perfect reason. So we have that ability of reason, and it's reason that will guide us through this generation process as we ascend to the stars to be alongside Helios, right? For just as though his light, or just as through his light he gives sight to our eyes, so also among the intelligible gods through his intellectual counterpart, which he causes to shine far more brightly than his rays in our upper air, he bestows, as I believe, on all the intellectual gods the faculty of thought and of being comprehended by thought. Besides these, another marvelous activity of Helios, the king of the all, is that by which he endows with superior lot the nobler races. I mean angels, daimons, heroes, and those divided souls which remain in the category of model and archetype and never give themselves over to bodies. I have now described the substance of our God that is prior to the world and his powers and activities, celebrating Helios, the king of the all, insofar as it was possible for me to compass his praise. But since eyes, as the saying goes, are more trustworthy than hearing, although they are, of course, less trustworthy and weaker than the intelligence, come, let me endeavor to tell also of his visible creative function. But let me first entreat him to grant that I speak with some measure of success. I love that he identifies these noble races, angels, demons, heroes, divided souls. Really interesting kind of hierarchy, eh?
Yeah, really interesting.
All right. From eternity, there subsisted surrounding Helios the visible world, and from eternity, the light that encompasses the world has its fixed station, not shining intermittently, nor in different ways at different times, but always in the same manner. And if one desired to comprehend, as far as the mind may, this eternal nature from the point of view of time, one would understand most easily how many, for the world throughout eternity, he is the cause. Point of view of time, he's talking about Chronos, right? Even Helios, he, king of the all, who shines without cessation. Now I am aware that the great philosopher Plato, and after him a man who, though he is later in time, is by no means inferior to him in genius. I mean Iamblichus of Colchis. Remember I told you he was a follower? Who through his writings initiated me, not only into the philosophic doctrines, but these also. I am aware, I say, that they employed as a hypothesis the conception of the generated world, and assumed for it, so to speak, a creation in time, in order that the magnitude of the works that arise from Helios might be recognized. But apart from the fact that I fall short altogether of their ability, I must by no means be so rash, especially since the glorious hero Iamblichus thought it was not without risk to assume, even as a bare hypothesis, a temporal limit for the creation of the world. Nay, rather, the God came forth from an eternal cause, or rather brought forth all things from everlasting engendering by his divine will, with untold speed and unsurpassed power, from the invisible, all things now visible in present time. Unending superpower, ever generating, ever recreating, everlasting, uncreated, you know? And this deep connection to Iamblichus, right? Iamblichus, that father of theurgy, master of the mystery. All right. And then he assigned as his own station the mid-heavens, in order that from all sides he may bestow equal blessing on the gods, who came forth by his agency and in company with him, and that he may guide the seven spheres in the heavens and the eighth sphere. Also, yes, and as I believe the ninth creation too, namely our world which revolves forever in a continuous cycle of death and of birth and death. For it is evident that the planets, as they dance in a circle about him, preserve as the measure of their motion a harmony between this God and their own movements, such as I shall now describe, and that the whole heaven also, which adapts itself to him, and now all its parts, is full of gods who proceed from Helios. For this God is Lord of five zones in the heavens, and when he traverses three of these, he begets, and those three, the three graces, right? The charities, more goddesses. And the remaining zones are the scales of mighty necessity, another goddess, Ananke, right? Which is that force of that chaos, the womb creation. To the Greeks, what I say is perhaps incomprehensible, as though one were obliged to say to them only what is known and familiar. Yet not even is this altogether strange to them as one might suppose. For who then, in your opinion, are the Dioscuri, right? The divine twins, the gods of horses, right? Their constellation, Gemini. O ye most wise, ye who accept without question so many of your traditions, do you not call them alternative days, because they may not both be seen on the same day? It is obvious by this you mean yesterday and today. He's talking about this as above, so below relation, and how Helios is the force that drives the stars. But what does this mean in the name of those same Dioscuri? Let me apply it to some natural object so that I may not say anything empty and senseless. But no such object could one find, however carefully one might search for it. For the theory that some have supposed to be held by the theogonists, that the two hemispheres of the universe are meant, has no meaning. For how one could call each other of the hemispheres alternative days is not easy to imagine, since the increase of their light in each separate day is imperceptible. But now let us consider a question on which some may think that I am innovating. We say correctly that those persons for whom the time of the sun's course above the earth is the same in one and the same month share the same day. Consider therefore whether the expression alternate days cannot be applied both to the tropics and the other, the polar circles. But someone will object that it does not apply equally to both. For though the former are always visible, and both of them are visible at once to those who inhabit that part of the earth, where shadows are cast in an opposite direction. Yet in the case of the latter, those who see the one do not see the other. I'm not 100% sure what he's getting at here with a lot of this alternate days stuff, I have to admit.
Yeah, not too sure.
However, not to dwell too long on the same subject, since he causes the winter and summer solstice, Helios is, as we know, the father of the seasons. And since he never forsakes the poles, he is Oceanus, the lord of the twofold substance. My meaning here is not obscure, is it? Seeing that before my time, Homer said the same thing. Oceanus, who is the father of all things, yes, for mortals and for the blessed gods too. As he himself would say, what he says is true. For there is one single thing in the whole of existence that is not the offspring of the substance of Oceanus. But what has that to do with the poles? I shall tell you, if I were better indeed to keep silence, but for all that I will speak. Again, he's starting to reveal mysteries. He's telling us that Helios is also Oceanus, which is kind of wild.
That's an interesting comparison.
Right? So let's see, what's the secret? Some say then, even though all men are not ready to believe it, that the sun travels in the starless heavens far above the region of the fixed stars. And on this theory, he will not be stationed midmost among the planets, but midway between the three worlds, that is, according to the hypothesis of the mysteries. If indeed one ought to use the word hypothesis, and not rather say established truths, using the word hypothesis for the study of the heavenly bodies. For the priests of the mysteries tell us they have been taught by the gods or mighty daimons, whereas the astronomers make plausible hypotheses from the harmony that they observe in the visible spheres. It is proper, no doubt, to approve the astronomers as well, but where any man thinks it better to believe the priests of the mysteries, him I admire and revere, both in jest and earnest. And so much for that, as the saying is. So he's saying that even though this isn't, he says this is an established truth, even though it's not literally true, because the demons told us to it, and it's a mystery, Even though the astronomers tell us that the sun isn't in this kind of fixed position above the stars, or the stars are fixed and then the sun is somehow above it, unfixed. The astrologers tell us that's not true, but it is true in a mystical sense, right?
I remember that line now from that song. It relates to this. It's from the song Ptolemy Was Wrong. If there's no ambiguity, if Venus shows all phases of the moon, the earth must revolve around the sun, but no one will believe me. Speaking a truth in a time when no one would believe them, right? And the central truth.
And Ptolemy is one of the great astrologers. That's beautiful.
Love it. Anyways.
All right. Now, besides those whom I have mentioned, there is in the heavens a great multitude of gods who have been recognized as such by those who survey the heavens, not casually, nor like cattle. For as he divides the three spheres by 4 through the zodiac, this is deep magic. Dividing 3 by 4, that's combining the masculine and the feminine to recreate the divine androgyne in the zodiac to rebirth Fani's. Dividing them is to create the unfolding universe, right? And you'll see this still saved within the alchemy. 3 and 4 creates the rebus, right? Which is associated with every one of the three. So he divides the zodiac also into 12 divine powers. And again, he divides every one of these 12 by 3, so as to make 36 gods in all. Hence, as I believe, there descends from above, from the heavens to us, a threefold gift of the graces. I mean, from the spheres, for this God, by thus dividing them by 4, sends to us the fourfold glory of the seasons, which expresses the changes of time. And indeed, on our earth, the graces imitate a circle in their statues. And it is Dionysus who is the giver of the graces. And in this very connection, he is said to reign with Helios. Why should I go on to speak to you of Horus? Now he's connecting the Egyptian mysteries. And Horus, right, the divine child to come, also deeply connected to Dionysus. And usually in the Imitatio Gratiae, they'll say that Horus and Dionysus are connected. Sometimes Osiris, right? And of the other gods, which all belong to Helios, for some his works men have learned to know this God, who makes the whole heavens perfect through the gift of intellectual blessings, and gives it a share of intelligible beauty in taking the heavens as their starting point. They have learned to know him both as a whole and his parts also from his abundant bestowal of good gifts. For he exercises control over all movement, even to the lowest plane of the universe, and everywhere he makes all things perfect, nature and souls, everything that exists. His light shines everywhere. And marshaling together this great army of the gods into a single commanding unity, he handed it over to Athene Pronoia. Okay, this is really important. That's Athena Pronoia, Athena of forethought, the wife of Prometheus, forethought. So he's now connecting Athena to it, and this idea of that Titanic Athena, that Pronoia. This is also Medea, Prometheus, right? Wild magic. As the legends say, sprang from the head of Zeus, but I say that she was sent forth from Helios, right? From the whole of him. So Athena comes from that sun, from the whole of the sun, which is just beautiful. Being contained within him, though I, one, disagree with the legend only so far as I assert that she came forth not from his highest part, but whole from the whole of him. For in other respects, since I believe that Zeus is in no wise different from Helios, I agree that the ancient tradition, and in using this very phrase, Athena Pronoia, I am not innovating. If I rightly understand the words, he came to Pytho and to gray-eyed Pronoia. Pytho is that great serpent snake goddess. This proves that the ancients also thought that Athena Pronoia shared the throne of Apollo, who, as we believe, differs in no way from Helios. Indeed, did not Homer, by divine inspiration, for he was, we may suppose, possessed by a god, reveal this truth, when he says often in his poems, "May I be honored even as Athena and Apollo were honored by Zeus," that is to say, who is identical with Helios. And just as King Apollo, through the singleness of his thoughts, is associated with Helios, so also must we believe that Athena has received her nature from Helios, and that she is his intelligence in perfect form. She's pure reason, right? That divine refinement of the sun.
Beautiful.
And so she binds together the gods who are assembled about Helios and brings them without confusion into unity with Helios, the king of the all. And she distributes and is the channel for stainless and pure life throughout the 7 spheres, from the highest vault of the heavens as far as Selene the moon. For Selene is the last of the heavenly spheres which Athena fills with wisdom. And by her aid Selene holds the intelligible, which is the higher than the heavens, and adorns with its forms the realm of matter that lies below her. And thus she does away with its savagery and confusion and disorder. Moreover, to mankind, Athena gives the blessing of wisdom and intelligence and the creative arts. And surely she dwells in the capitals of cities, because through her wisdom she has established the community of the state. She brings democracy, right? Now we're about to get super wild. Here's another connection to the Athenians, to Lady Babylon. He doesn't call her Lady Babylon, but he identifies this. He says, I have still to say a few words about Aphrodite, right? The goddess of love, who, as the wise men among the Phoenicians affirm, as I believe, assists Helios in his creative function, right?
Mm.
This is Astarte talking about how that Aphrodite is also Helios, that erotic function of the Helios. And again, it's connecting that purple people, this deep mystery. This makes me think of Lucian and the Syrian goddess, because he does the same thing. He calls it the Syrian Aphrodite. She is in very truth a synthesis of the heavenly gods. Wow. And in their harmony, she is the spirit of love and unity. Right? She harmonizes all the gods. For she is very near to Helios, and when she pursues the same course as he and approaches him, she fills the skies with fair weather and gives generative power to the earth. For she herself takes thought for the continuous birth of living things. And though of that continuous birth, King Helios is the primary creative cause, yet Aphrodite is the joint cause with him. She who enchants our souls with her charm and sends down to earth from the upper air rays of light most sweet and stainless, aye, more lustrous than gold itself. I desire to mete out to you still more of the theology of the Phoenicians, and whether it is to be purpose, my argument as it proceeds will show the inhabitants of Emesa, a place, time immemorial, sacred to Helios. Now, this is a place scholars debate about what he's talking about, but it seems to be a ritual center in Syria.
They
That
talk about it in Heliogabalus as well.
yeah, that where they praised Helios, and they also praised other gods there, but it was a main cult for the sun. Sacred to Helios, associate Helios in their temples, Monimos and Azizos. So these are different gods that are in that Syriac religion. He's going to name several, and he'll tell us their correspondences. Iamblichus, from whom I have taken this and all besides, a little from a great store, says that the secret meaning to be interpreted is that Monimos is Hermes and Azizos is Ares, the assessors of Helios, who are the channel for many blessings to the region of our earth. So again, he's connecting it to the Far East, to the Syrian and Phoenician traditions, which is wild. Such then are the works of Helios in the heavens, and when completed by means of the gods whom I have named, they reach even unto the furthest bounds of the earth. But to tell the number of all his works in the region below the moon would take too long. Nevertheless, I must describe them in brief summary. Now I am aware that I mentioned them earlier when I claimed that from the things visible we could observe the invisible properties of the God's substance. But the argument demands that I should expound them also in proper order. I said then that Helios holds sway among the intellectual gods, in that he unites into one about his own undivided substance a great multitude of the gods. And further, I demonstrated that among the gods whom we can perceive, who revolve eternally in their most blessed path, he is leader and Lord, since he bestows on their nature its generative power, and fills the whole heavens not only with visible rays of light, but with countless other blessings that are invisible. And further, that the blessings which are abundantly supplied by the other visible gods are made perfect by him. And that even prior to this, the visible gods themselves are made perfect by his unspeakable and divine activity. In the same manner, we must believe that on this, our world of generation, certain gods have alighted who are linked together with Helios. And these gods guide the fourfold nature of the elements, and inhabit together with the three higher races, those souls which are upborn by the elements. But for the divided souls also, of how many blessings is he the cause? For he extends to them the faculty of judging, and guides them with justice, and purifies them by his brilliant light. Again, does he not set in motion the whole of nature, and kindle life therein, by bestowing on it generative power from on high. But from the divided natures also, is he not the cause that they journey to their appointed end? For Aristotle says that the man is begotten by man and the sun together. Accordingly, the same theory about King Helios surely apply to all the other activities of the divided souls. Again, does he not produce for us rain and wind and the clouds and the skies by employing as though it were matter the two kinds of vapor? For when he heats the earth, he draws up steam and smoke. For these there arise not only the clouds, but also all the physical changes on our earth, both great and small. It's kind of wild how much they knew of science, eh?
Yeah.
He's making generalizations, but there's a lot of knowledge here. But why do I deal with the same question at such length when I am free at last to come to my goal, though not till I have first celebrated all the blessings that Helios has given to mankind? From him are we born, and by him are we nourished. But his more divine gifts, all that he bestows on our souls when he frees them from the body, and then lifts them up on high to the region of those substances that are akin to the God, and the fineness and vigor of his divine rays, which are assigned as a sort of vehicle for the safe descent of our souls into this world of generation. All this I say, let others celebrate in fitting strains, but let me believe it rather than demonstrate its truth. However, I need not hesitate to discuss so much as is known to all. Plato says that the sky is our instructor in wisdom, for from its contemplation we have learned to know the nature of number, whose distinguishing characteristics we know only from the course of the sun. Plato himself says that day and night were created first, and next, from observing the moon's light, which was bestowed on the goddess by Helios, we later progress still further in understanding of these matters, in every case conjecturing the harmony of all things with this God. For Plato himself says somewhere that our race was by nature doomed to toil, and so the gods pitied us and gave us Dionysus and the muses as playfellows. I kind of like, we were doomed, so he gave us the muses and Dionysus, give us some good drugs, madness, and inspiration to create art and love. Make it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Crazy. And we recognize that Helios is their common lord, since he is celebrated as the father of Dionysus and the leader of the muses. And has not Apollo, who is his colleague in empire, set up oracles in every part of the earth, and given to men inspired wisdom, and regulated their cities by means of religious and political ordinances? And he has civilized the greater part of the world by means of Greek colonies, and so made it easier for the world to be governed by the Romans. For the Romans themselves not only belong to the Greek race, but also the sacred ordinances and the pious belief in the gods which they have established and maintain are, from beginning to end, Greek. And besides this, they have established a constitution, not inferior to that of any one of the best governed states, if indeed it be not superior to all others that have ever been put into practice. For which reason I myself recognize that our city is Greek, both in descent and as it to its constitution. Wow. So he's even admitting that he, even as an emperor, he needs to kind of strive for this city and Athena and that democracy, and recognizes that's the heart of his constitution, even though they're this Republican empire,
It's quite beautiful.
It is. Okay. Oops. Right. Shall I go on to tell you how Helios took thought for the health and safety of all men by begetting Asclepius, to be the savior of the whole world, and how bestowed on us every kind of excellence by sending down to us Aphrodite together with Athena, and thus laid down for our protection what is almost a law, that we should only unite to beget our kind. Surely it is for this reason that an agreement... I don't agree with that. You should only unite to beget your kind. No. Bring on Athena. Surely it is for this reason that an agreement with the course of the sun, all plants, all the tribes of living things are aroused to bring forth their kind. What need is there for me to glorify his beams and his light? For surely everyone knows how terrible is night without a moon or stars, so that from this he can calculate how great a boon for us is the light of the moon, of the sun. And this very light he supplies at night without ceasing, and directly from the moon in those upper spaces where it is needed, while he grants us through the night a truce from toil. But there would be no limit to the account if one should endeavor to describe all his gifts of this sort. For there is no single blessing in our lives which we do not receive as a gift from this God, either perfect from him alone or through the other gods perfected by him. Moreover, he is the founder of our city. Not only does Zeus, who is glorified as the father of all things, inhabit its citadel, together with Athena and Aphrodite, but Apollo also dwells on the Palatine Hill, and Helios himself, under his name of his, which is commonly known and familiar to all. And I could say much to prove that we, the sons of Romulus and Aeneas, are in, so Romulus, Remus, founders of Rome, Aeneas, the great Trojan who helped also establish Rome, and are in every way in all respects connected with him. But I will mention briefly only what is more familiar. According to the legend, Aeneas is the son of Aphrodite, who is subordinate to Helios and is his kinswoman. And the tradition has been handed down that the founder of our city was the son of Ares. And the paradoxical element in the tale has been believed because of the portents which later appeared to support it. For a she-wolf, they say, gave him suck. Now I'm aware that Ares, who is called Azizos by the Syrians who inhabit Emesa, precedes Helios in the sacred procession. But I mentioned it before, so I think I may let it pass. But why is the wolf sacred only to Ares and not to Helios? Yet men call the period of year Ikikabas, which is derived from wolf.
Like hobbits, yeah.
This is another god figure too, who is the lover of, I believe it's, I'm trying to remember, Phineas. Not only Homer and the famous men of Greece call it by this name, but also the god himself when he says, with dancing does he bring to a close his journey of 12 months, even the Akabas.
Wow.
Now, do you wish me to bring forward a still greater proof that the founder of our city was sent down to earth, not by Ares alone, though perhaps some noble daemon with the character of Ares did take part in the fashioning of his mortal body, even who is said to have visited Sylvia. So Sylvia is another name for Rhea, the great mother, Flo. When she was carrying water for the bath of the goddess, but the whole truth is that the soul of the god Quirinus. So this is another really interesting figure. Quirinus is a god, demigod, probably of Sabine origin, definitely related to Romulus, and seems to be like the god of the Roman state. Yeah, really interesting. Came down to earth from Helios, for we must, I think, believe the sacred tradition and the close conjunction of Helios and Selene, who share the empire over the visible world, even as it caused his soul to descend to earth, in like manner caused to mount upwards. Him whom it received back from the earth after blotting out with fire from a thunderbolt the mortal part of his body. So clearly did she who creates earthly matter, she whose place is at the furthest point below the sun, receive Quirinus, when he sent down to earth by Athena, goddess of forethought, and when he took flight again from earth, she led him back straightway to Helios, the king of the all. So he's just trying to establish again that Rome and all of their grand mythologies, all of their great gods are all connected, even their demigods are connected to Helios. So Quirinus is connected to Helios, Romulus is connected to Helios, and now the second great king, Numa, is connected to Helios, right? Here we go. Do you wish me to mention yet another proof of this? I mean, the work of King Numa. In Rome, maiden priestesses guard the undying flame of the sun at different hours in turn. They guard the fire that is produced on earth by the agency of the god. And I can tell you a still greater proof of the power of this God, which is the work that most divine king himself. The months are reckoned from the moon by, one may say, all other peoples, but we and the Egyptians alone reckon the days of every year according to the movements of the sun. If after this I should say that we also worship Mithras, right? Mithras is a divine son, the slayer of the bull. This is a Persian mystery religion. Another one of these cults he's trying to incorporate. And celebrate games in honor of Helios every 4 years. I shall be speaking of customs that are somewhat recent. But perhaps it is better to cite a proof from the remote past. The beginning of the cycle of the year is placed at different times by different peoples. Some place it at the spring equinox, others at the height of summer, and many in the late autumn. But they each and all sing the praises of the most visible gifts of Helios. Right? One nation celebrates the season best adapted for work in the fields, when the earth bursts into bloom and exalts, when all the crops are just beginning to sprout, and when the sea begins to be safe for sailing, and the disagreeable glooming winter puts on a more cheerful aspect. Others again award the crown to the summer season, since at that time they can safely feel confidence about the yield of the fruits, when the grains have already been harvested, and midsummer is now at its height, and the fruits on the trees are ripening. Others again will still more steadily regard as the close of the year, the time when all the fruits are in their perfect prime and decay has already set in. For this reason, they celebrate the annual festival of the new year in late autumn. But our forefathers from the time of the most divine King Numa paid still greater reverence to the god Helios. They ignored the question of mere utility, I think, because they were naturally religious and endowed with unusual intelligence. But they saw that he is the cause of all that is useful. And so they ordered the observance of the new year to correspond with the present season. That is to say, when King Helios returns to us again, and leaving the region furthest south and rounding Capricorn, as though it were a goalpost, advances from the south to the north to give us our share of the blessings of the year. And that our forefathers, because they comprehended this correctly, thus established the beginning of the year one may perceive from the following. For it was not, I think, the time when the god turns, but the time when he becomes visible to all men as he travels from south to north, that they appointed for the festival. Still, unknown to them was the nicety of those laws which the Chaldeans and the Egyptians discovered, and which Hipparchus and Ptolemy, we just mentioned Ptolemy, and Hipparchus is another great astrologer, perfected. But they judged simply by sense perception and were limited by what they could actually see. But the truth of these facts was recognized, as I said, by a later generation, before the beginning of the year, at the end of the month, which is called after Kronos, god of time and the harvest. We celebrate in honor of Helios the most splendid games, and we dedicate the festival to the invincible sun. Olympics, right? And after this, it is not lawful to perform any of the shows that belong in the last month, gloomy as they are, though necessary. But in the cycle immediately after the end of the Chronia, the festival to Kronos, follow the Hilaria. That festival may the ruling gods grant to me praise and to celebrate with sacrifice. And above all others, may Helios himself, the king of the all, grant me this. Even he who from eternity has proceeded from the generative substance of the good. Even he who is midmost of the midmost intellectual gods, who fills them with continuity and endless beauty and superabundance of generative power and perfect reason, yea, with all blessings at once and independently of time. And now he illumes his own visible abode, from eternity moves as the center of the whole heavens, and bestows a share of intelligible beauty on the whole visible world, and fills whole heavens with the same number of gods as he contains in himself in intellectual form. And without division, they reveal themselves in manifold form surrounding him, but they're attached to him in a form of unity. Our galaxy, right? Now we get him talking to his friend Celeste, who I told you about at the beginning. This discourse, friend Sallust, I composed in 3 nights at most, in harmony with the threefold creative power of the god, as far as possible, just as it occurred to my memory, and I had ventured to write it down and to dedicate it to you because you thought my earlier work on the Chronia was not wholly worthless. He's writing it also because of this time of the year when the sun returns for the Chronia, and because he recognized his writings as good about the Chronia. But if you wish to meet with a more complete and more mystical treatment of the same thing, then read the writings of the inspired Iamblichus on the subject. You will find the most consummate wisdom which man can achieve. And may mighty Helios grant that I too may attain to no less perfect knowledge of himself, and that I may instruct all men, speaking generally, but especially those who are worthy to learn. So long as Helios grants, let us all in common revere Iamblichus, the beloved of the gods, for he is the source for what I have set down here. A few thoughts from many as they occurred to my mind. However, I know well that no one can utter anything more perfect than he, nay, not though he should labor long at the task and say very much that is new, for he will naturally diverge thereby from the truest knowledge of the god. Therefore, it would probably have been a vain undertaking to compose anything after Iamblichus on the subject if I have written this discourse for the sake of giving instruction. So if you want to know how to do the theurgy, go to Iamblichus. If you want to do the ritual, there is no better instructor. All right. But since I wish to compose a hymn to express my gratitude to God, I thought that this was the best place in which to tell, to the best of my power, of his essential nature. And so I think that not in vain has this discourse been composed. For the same, to the extent of your powers, offer sacrifice to the immortal gods. I apply not to sacrifice only, but also to the praises that we offer to the gods. For the third time, therefore, I pray that Helios, the king of the all, may be gracious to me in recompense for this my zeal, and may he grant me a virtuous life and a more perfect wisdom and inspired intelligence. For when fate wills, the gentlest exit that may be from life at a fitting hour, and that I may ascend to him thereafter and abide with him forever if possible. But if that be more than the actions of my life deserve, for many periods of many years. Take me into your abode, dear Helios.
Wow.
Wasn't that awesome?
That was amazing.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a heavy one, right? There was a lot I read and shouted at you, but this is a lot more easily digestible than Iamblichus.
Yes. This is the light version.
This is the light version. And this is it's just a beautiful image of paganism at that time, and someone who's initiated in this religion trying to, contend with the changing world around him and reform and reinvigorate his own faith, right? And it's so interesting because you see this trend towards monotheism, but at the same time, you see this staunch assertion of polytheism, right? Helios is the absolute center and perfected one, but all the gods live within him and are of him. The
one is the all.
The one and the all. And just a beautiful thing. I really loved it. It's philosophy, it's a hymn, it's a prayer, it's a call to reformation. It's the cry of a very religious man, a man who was really deeply moved by the mysteries, trying to talk to his friend. Just a really powerful piece. What did you think overall, Graham?
Very powerful. It reminds me of, I just had a thought on my brain. Sort of like, it's like he's telling his friend and his readers that the myths never died. We just have to look at them in our own times and with our own language.
Right. And we can also, I love how he connects and he sees all these interconnections. He connects himself to the Syrian, to the Phoenician, to the Egyptian, to the, what was the other one? To Serapis, to Mithras,
It really reminds me of Artaud drawing from all these different schools of thought and religion, and kind of emphasizing that there's like these are all reflections of some greater, truer culture that
Right.
we all share in. And we all
And I
have maybe different words for it, but it's the same thing. And that's part of the beauty, is that there's all these different languages for the same connection.
Right. I also really love this. Like, you have this deeply mystical person, this highly educated person, the most powerful person at that moment in the world, right? And what is he doing? He's talking about his childhood love of the sun, and how, as a child, you could see the truth that everything generated from the light. And even then, in that pure childhood reason, he recognized the nature of reality, and that drove him throughout his whole thing. And there's something beautiful about this. I feel like in our modern age, we have become disconnected from the natural world. We look at something like the sun and we do not see this magic generative force of life,
We
and of
take it
life,
for we
you
take it
know,
for granted.
right? We take it for granted. And I love, one of the things that always stood out to me is George Carlin. You know, he's an atheist, but he has this incredible joke where he talks about, I worship the sun. You know why? Because I can see it and it's right there in the sky. And I loved it. And it always stuck with me, even as a little child, as a young person seeing that. And
It's
it's just
exactly what Heliogabalus's cult was saying, right? The sun's right there. No need to create a deity for or a statue for it. We can just
right,
worship it in its everyday glory.
right. It's the sun and the moon, right? The father and the mother, black and white, in harmony together. That's the only thing I do. I don't love a lot of his monotheistic tendencies. I don't love his tendency to remove or denigrate the female. Like, why Hades? Why not Persephone? You know, right? I mean, and Aphrodite becomes reduced. You know, they're all within Helios, but you know, this is a masculine emperor, leader of the Roman world. What can we expect? Sometime, you know.
I'd say no system is perfect, right? And that's why we have to come approach anything with a critical eye.
Right? We always learn, we always read, and as much as we love Julian, we're critical of him. Just as much as we love Artaud, we're critical of him. Right?
Exactly.
All
We're all
right.
human.
Well, this was so much fun, Graham. Anything you got in the works lately that you want to talk about and promote?
A couple things. Fiastai is still coming out. The release has been pushed to September, but it is coming, along with the reprint of Hiraeth. And Chaosmos is still. I'm still sending copies out to people,
Beautiful.
uh, and working slowly on a wonderful collaborative project with some people in the Discord community on a cut up poetry art book that's going to be released at some point, and the proceeds will be donated to a local charity organization that helps bring musical instruments to low income neighborhoods.
So beautiful. I just love that. It's amazing. And you know, if people are interested in helping or participating, reach out to us on the Discord. The idea of the cut up poetry is that you would submit a poem, and then Graham would cut it up with his own words and create something new. So that's a really
Exactly.
beautiful project. Love it. And as always, you can find all of Graham's links in the description below. Don't forget to also check out his musical projects. Have you been doing any music lately, Graham?
Not too much. We're sort of just in celebrating Dream Eater still, and we do have a new song in the works, but personal lives have sort of taken precedence over music right now, so it'll come all in good time.
Amazing. And next week, we're going to get together and we're going to be talking about more Artaud. Do you want to just talk a little bit about next week's episode?
Heck yes, I'm very excited for this. We're going to be talking about this wonderful tome, which is Antonin Artaud Drawings and Portraits.
Wow.
And it is a wonderful tome. I highly recommend people get it. It's on Chapters in Barnes and Noble, etc. And it's a breakdown by one of his best friends and closest collaborators of his theory of it behind his drawings. And then we'll also showcase some of these drawings and talk about them. Because his visual art is something that not many people know about.
Oh,
But it is profoundly magical and powerful stuff. And I think more of the world needs to be a part of this.
absolutely. You know, Artaud, we're always nerding out about Artaud. Graham's been reading Artaud in Mexico as well and been sending me stuff. And we're always just like, the level of Orphic Vox, his knowledge of magic, of occult language, of gematria, it's so underappreciated. And it exudes in everything he produces and creates. And his art is absolutely no exception. And it's one of the less appreciated aspects of his work because he only had, like I think you said, one or two in his own lifetime, and then one art showing since, right?
Yeah, there have been a very select few showcases of his drawings. Many of them are in private collections. A couple of them are in museums. And so this book, they were able to approach a lot of these people and ask permission to photograph the drawings from their collections to be able to show the world because more people need to see them.
Amazing. So that'll be fun, and we'll get right down to into this personal theory, which is so interesting, right? Artaud had a lot of really interesting collaborators, and this is a different way to view his work that will be really intriguing. So I'm so excited for it.
Absolutely. It's going to be a blast.
Amazing. So make sure you tune in next Saturday for that. Any final words, Graham, for our audience? Any final thoughts on Emperor Julian and the hymn to King Helios?
Don't take nature for granted. It's right there. You can connect with it anytime you want, really, assuming you don't live in the heart of a city with no green space. But even then, you can look at the sun and the clouds and the birds. It's all there. It's all there for our enjoyment.
Right? You got to connect with the world around you as well as that inner self, connect to that sun, let that light shine on you, connect to the moon, let that light shine on you, and let that light shine into your heart.
Exactly.
Know the self,
Know
right?
the self.
Beautiful. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next week with more Searching for Dragons. Here we go.
And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly.